new episodes of The View when she tries to pull the race card.
Yes.
And then she's like, America is racist. And then they're like, yeah, they might be racist, but they're not like slave owner racist. like somebody that we
That's so true.
Yeah.
One thing, and I would have even actually not give her any, is she said, well, like, I guess that's just what, like, they did back then.
Yeah.
She should have followed that up with saying something along the lines of, and I understand that that's a departure from the way I've talked about this before.
The joke hit like a lightning bolt, sharp, precise, and impossible to ignore. The audience erupted, but Gutfeld wasn't just cracking jokes for laughs. He seized the moment to expose what he saw as glaring hypocrisy, and he didn't hold back. For years, Sunny Hostin had built her platform on demanding accountability, especially when it came to historical injustices. She'd been vocal, loud, even about how ancestry shapes moral responsibility, pushing the idea that people must acknowledge and atone for the past. But when the conversation turned to her own lineage, the energy shifted. Instead of confronting the uncomfortable truth head-on, she brushed it off like it was just another footnote in history. Gutfeld wasn't about to let that slide. With razor-sharp precision, he pointed out how identity politics can backfire when personal narratives clash with inconvenient realities. It's easy to call out others, but what happens when the same standards are applied to you? Sunny had spent years holding people's feet to the fire over their ancestral ties, but when the heat was turned on her, suddenly the rules changed. Gutfeld's breakdown was brutal yet calculated. He didn't just highlight the contradiction, he stressed why self-awareness is crucial when diving into weighty topics like race and history. It's one thing to preach accountability, but quite another to live it when the spotlight shines on you. The message was clear. If you want to demand introspection from others, you better be ready to examine yourself.
It is funny. She is so wrapped up in identity, and she had no idea who she was.
Well, now we understand why she always makes Whoopi get the coffee.
Exactly, because if she is shaming descendants of this, will she continue to do that when she is now one of...
He laid it out plain and simple. If you're going to use ancestry as a moral yardstick for others, then you better be prepared to measure yourself by the same standards. And here's where the real irony kicked in. Sunny, who has long condemned the legacy of oppression, found herself tied to the very system she so passionately decries. But instead of taking a moment to reflect, acknowledge, or even address it, she sidestepped the issue completely, almost like it wasn't worth discussing. That reaction didn't sit well with a lot of people. Gutfeld's commentary hit home for those who have grown tired of the selective outrage that often accompanies moral grandstanding. It was a stark reminder of what happens when self-righteousness collides with inconvenient truths. In that moment, Sunny's credibility, at least in Gutfeld's eyes, took a serious hit. For Gutfeld, this wasn't just about Sunny. It was a prime example of how personal accountability often takes a back seat to performative outrage. And once the internet got wind of the situation, it was game over. Social media went into full meltdown mode. Memes, jokes, and hot takes flooded the internet at lightning speed. One viral post summed up the irony perfectly. Reparations? Let me write that check to myself real quick. Twitter and TikTok turned into battlegrounds of sarcasm and heated debates. Some users defended Sunny, arguing that she shouldn't be judged for the actions of her ancestors. But a whole lot of people couldn't ignore the glaring contradiction. For years, Sunny had built her brand around demanding accountability, insisting that others must reckon with their family's past, even if they had nothing to do with it. But when the tables turned and it was her history in the spotlight, she brushed it off with a casual, almost dismissive shrug, calling it just a fact of life. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who had been paying attention to her public persona. It was as if the very principles she'd used to build her career suddenly became irrelevant when they hit too close to home.
In her defense, everyone has ancestors that did unspeakably horrible things. It's just that not everyone's ancestors have records tied to their DNA about it. Worried for Sunny Hostin's progeny in the future that do a DNA test and find out that they were related to a cast member of The View. And they're like, oh, it all makes so much sense now. Why I'm so stupid and fat.
In her defense, everyone has ancestors who did unspeakably horrible things. It's just that not everyone's ancestors have records tied to their DNA about it. The worry for Sunny Hostin's progeny in the future? Imagine they do a DNA test and find out they're related to a cast member of The View. They'd probably think, oh, it all makes so much sense now. That's why I'm so stupid and fat. That response, however, didn't sit well with many. It sparked a massive debate. Should public figures like Sunny be held to the same moral standards they impose on others? Critics were ruthless, saying her reaction lacked the self-reflection and growth she has demanded from so many others. The hypocrisy was too blatant to ignore, and the backlash didn't just disappear overnight. It fueled discussions for weeks, but the fallout wasn't just an online spectacle. It made things seriously awkward on The View. The show, usually filled with lively debates and strong opinions, suddenly turned into an awkward staring contest. When the bombshell about Sunny's ancestors was dropped, the energy at the table vanished in an instant. Whoopi Goldberg, who's always quick with a comeback, looked stunned. For once, even she seemed unsure of what to say. Sunny, usually fierce in her arguments, didn't have much to add. The irony of the situation was too thick to cut through. It was one of those rare TV moments where the silence said everything over. On Greg Gutfeld's panel, the mood couldn't have been more different. His co-hosts wasted zero time diving in, throwing sharp yet playful jabs that had the whole table cracking up. One panelist even quipped, "Guess Sunny's next segment should be about shaming herself." The laughter wasn't just for show, it was their way of hammering home the hypocrisy they saw in her stance. They weren't just poking fun, they were exposing what they viewed as massive cracks in her so-called moral high ground. But not everyone took the moment as an opportunity for jokes. Rosie O'Donnell stepped in with a more measured take, offering a perspective that cut through the noise. She made one key point. People should be judged by their actions, not by the actions of their ancestors. At the same time, she didn't ignore the bigger picture.
Yes, there's nothing worse than to find out you're a white woman.
She's so disappointed.
It's really disappointing.
Her mother was white.
Oh my God.
shame.
Oh my God.
The horror. History, and finds out that this is fantastic. She is descended from slaveholders. She's descended from slaveholders, and she's been apparently getting a lot of mail about her call for reparations because it turns out she's going to be paying them and not actually receiving.
Rosie highlighted how identity politics can often oversimplify history, reducing deeply complex issues to blanket narratives that don't always hold up under scrutiny. This revelation about Sunny's lineage, she argued, was a prime example of why these rigid narratives can be dangerous, because when the script gets flipped, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. The divide in reactions between Sunny's critics and her defenders was impossible to miss. Some saw this as an opportunity for a much-needed conversation about personal accountability. Others believed it was just another case of identity politics coming back to bite one of its loudest champions. Either way, one thing was clear. Sunny's response didn't sit right with a lot of people, and that's when things got even more frustrating for her critics. Sunny had a golden opportunity in front of her. This could have been a moment of self-awareness, an actual reckoning with her own words and the reality of her family's past. She could have used this revelation to spark a deeper discussion about how history shapes us, how we confront uncomfortable truths, and how personal responsibility should be applied fairly across the board. But instead, she brushed it off as just a fact of life. For someone who has made a career out of demanding accountability, that casual dismissal hit hard. This wasn't just about a personal contradiction, it was about credibility. Had she leaned into the irony, admitted the difficulty of reconciling her family's past, and used the moment to encourage real dialogue, she could have shifted the narrative entirely. But by avoiding reflection, she didn't just let the moment slip away, she made it even bigger. And now, the conversation wasn't about history anymore. It was about her.
If you average out the View hosts, among the dumbest people on television.
Sunny's dumb. Certainly not the brightest person. And what she just said just doesn't make any sense. It's just like so silly to say. It's not a well thought out. It's like if you had an idea for a premise and it was totally baked and half baked and you went on stage with it and it's nothing.
Just
there.
go for it.
Yeah, it's nothing.
This could have been a huge moment. one that reminded everyone that nobody's history is clean, simple, or free from contradictions. But instead of using it as an opportunity for meaningful reflection, Sunny's reaction shifted the entire conversation. Suddenly, the focus wasn't on historical complexities, it was on her perceived hypocrisy. What could have been an insightful discussion on personal accountability turned into yet another heated debate about double standards. Sunny's situation is a textbook example of how moral certainty can crumble the moment inconvenient truths come to light. She spent years insisting that others must reckon with their history, but when it came to her own, the rules suddenly changed. And that raised the big question. If you demand accountability from everyone else, shouldn't you be willing to hold yourself to the same standard? And if she thought the controversy would blow over, the internet had other plans. Viral memes, endless social media reactions, and Greg Gutfeld's brutal commentary made sure this moment wasn't fading into the background anytime soon. Now, Sunny is at a crossroads. Does she address the backlash head-on and try to reclaim the narrative, or does she ignore it entirely and risk letting the scandal define her public image? Either way, the timing could not be worse for her, because this isn't even the biggest problem on her plate right now. That's right, Sunny Hostin has been making headlines left and right, but not for her usual fiery takes on The View. This time, the spotlight isn't on her words, it's on her husband.
I want a citizen that has a policy. I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify. He's got 11 million listeners. He's got $100 million, contract as of 2020. But I do think as the podcast platform, you have to have some sort of guidelines. How about a disclaimer on his podcast that says, this is misinformation? How about removing some of the podcasts that disseminate this misinformation?
They have.
And that's
Dr. Emmanuel Hostin, an orthopedic surgeon and the head of Hostin Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, is now at the center of a legal firestorm that's shaking up the medical industry. And we're not talking about some minor lawsuit. This is the big leagues. The allegations? Insurance fraud, illegal kickbacks, brace yourself, a massive RICO law lawsuit involving a jaw-dropping 180 defendants. Yeah, this isn't just some run-of-the-mill legal battle. This is a high-stakes scandal that could send shockwaves through the industry. The accusations are serious, the case is explosive, and the fallout is just beginning. So, while Sunny is out here dodging questions about her own accountability, her husband is facing an even bigger storm. And if she thought public scrutiny was tough before, she hasn't seen anything yet. Let's break down exactly what's going on, because this case is about to get wild. The RICO Act, short for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations. Act was created to take down organized crime, the kind of stuff straight out of The Godfather. It was meant for mob bosses, gangsters, and crime syndicates. But in a shocking turn of events, this case isn't about back alley deals and underground crime rings. Nope. This time it's doctors, surgeons, and medical professionals at the center of a massive legal fight storm. And at the heart of it, Dr. Emmanuel Hostin. The lawsuit accuses Dr. Hostin and a web of other medical professionals of masterminding a scheme that exploited the healthcare system for massive financial gain. The allegations say they accepted under-the-table payments in exchange for unnecessary surgeries. We're talking completely bogus procedures, billed to unsuspecting insurance companies. Imagine this: patients being put under anesthesia, completely unaware that the surgeries they were about to receive weren't actually medically necessary. Insurance companies blindly covering the costs.
To a new lawsuit obtained by Page Six, the orthopedic surgeon was one of 200 defendants named in one of the biggest racketeer influenced and corrupt organization cases ever filed in New York. Emmanuel was accused of federal insurance fraud and, quote, getting kickbacks by performing surgery and billing a company that insured taxi companies,
funneling millions of dollars into a system that, according to the lawsuit, was nothing more than a cash printing machine for corrupt doctors. Money flowed through the system like a rigged casino game, except this time, the stakes weren't poker. Chips, they were people's health, and that's just the beginning. The lawsuit directly targets Dr. Hostin, accusing him of accepting financial kickbacks for pushing and performing arthroscopic surgeries, those minimally invasive procedures, commonly used to fix joint issues in the knee or shoulder. On the surface, these operations might seem routine, but according to the lawsuit, many of them were completely unnecessary. That raises the chilling question. Were these patients actually in need of medical intervention, or were they just unwitting? Participants in a money-making scheme designed to siphon millions out of the healthcare system? Imagine putting your trust in a doctor, believing they have your best interests at heart, only to discover you were nothing more than a pawn in a profit-driven scam. That kind of betrayal doesn't just sting, it shakes the very foundation of the doctor-patient relationship. And that's exactly what American Transit Insurance Company, ADCT, and other plaintiffs are claiming in the lawsuit. They allege they were scammed out of millions, forced to pay for surgeries that were either completely unnecessary or, worse, never even happened. It's a jaw-dropping accusation that paints a picture of a medical system twisted for profit, with unsuspecting patients going under the knife for no reason while money flowed behind the scenes. But let's not pretend insurance companies are saints in this story. ADCT itself has a long history of controversy, with accusations of shortchanging, doctors rejecting legitimate claims and exploiting loopholes to avoid paying out. This lawsuit isn't just about calling out corruption in the medical field. It's a full-blown battle between two powerhouses, each trying to paint the other as the real villain. And Dr. Hostin's defense team? They're not going down without a fight. His attorney, Daniel Thwaites, came out swinging, calling the lawsuit completely baseless. According to him,
I wouldn't do it, even though I can't sing.
You would not sing?
No, I would not. I would not normalize him. And she says, I love our country. How do you love your country and support and normalize somebody who was a convicted felon who really wants to destroy the country, in my opinion? I don't understand how you say you love your country at the same time as you normalize this convicted felon, which I can say now every day.
A lot of my family voted for Trump. They love the country and vote for him. I think that people make these decisions for a lot of reasons.
Okay, fine. And I would not be the person to say don't do it, because I believe in free speech and everything about it. I personally would not do it. No one's asked me, but that's another story.
I would love for you to do a roast at the Trump inauguration.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, no one else had.
Voice and music speak for themselves. But now, her decision to perform at the president's inauguration has put her squarely in the crosshairs of those who see anything tied to the political establishment as problematic. Suddenly, Carrie Underwood, who had always been able to stay above the fray, was accused of supporting a convicted felon, a narrative that critics latched onto, despite the fact that it wasn't even close to the full picture. The backlash was swift and intense, with people demanding her cancellation. They couldn't wrap their heads around why she would associate with a president who many see as a deeply divisive figure. What happened to simply respecting a musician's right to perform at a historic event? Why did her choice to participate in such a moment become grounds for moral judgment? And yet, despite all the uproar, Carrie seemed to come out of it untouched. The more people raged, the more she appeared to be cementing her image as a grounded, humble star who doesn't play the celebrity game. It was almost like the public couldn't decide whether to embrace or cancel her, and the indecision worked in her favor. The real question became, why was there such an intense push to cancel someone like Carrie? Was it about the performance itself, or more about the underlying political message people were trying to impose on her? For years, Carrie Underwood had flown under the radar, staying away from the drama that so often surrounds the world of celebrity. This sudden shift in attention felt like the entertainment industry was trying to tear down someone who had, up until now, managed to avoid all the typical pitfalls of fame. In this swirl of chaos, the one thing that seemed clear was the growing discomfort people had with holding others accountable while completely ignoring their own contradictions. Whether it was Sunny's alleged involvement in her husband's shady business dealings, or Carrie's decision to support an inauguration, it all highlighted the complexities of public accountability in the age of social media. People were quick to cast judgment on others while failing to fully examine their own biases and motivations. In the end, both Sunny and Carrie became symbols of this paradox, raising important questions about how far accountability should go and whether it should apply to everyone equally, regardless of the side they're on. Labels. Carrie Underwood had become the focal point for a battle over celebrity activism, yet many of her fellow artists stayed quiet, either out of fear or indifference. John Rich's call to action amplified the sense that Carrie was standing alone, while the rest of the entertainment industry seemed content to let her bear the brunt of the Carrie Underwood's decision to perform at the inauguration sparked intense controversy, especially from The View, where some hosts harshly criticized Her choice. One host even compared it to normalizing a convicted felon, despite there being no conviction. Much of the backlash came from a political lens, where Carrie was accused of supporting a figure many found problematic, simply because she accepted an invitation to perform. However, the real question is, was her performance truly about politics, or was it about honoring her country, regardless of who was in office? Some of the co-hosts on The View did try to take a more balanced stance, questioning why anyone would be canceled for making a decision based on their own beliefs, yet their voices were drowned out by the louder, more accusatory ones. These critics were quick to suggest that anyone who disagreed with Carrie's choice should stop supporting her altogether, as though they were the arbiters of who deserved a career in the first place. But despite the uproar, Carrie continued to thrive. Her music sales stayed strong, and her concerts remained packed, proving that the backlash hadn't broken her. Over time, the outrage faded as the internet moved on to the next hot topic, showcasing how quickly cancel culture can lose steam. What remains is Carrie's unwavering authenticity and strength. The fans who turned against her were replaced by a new crowd, people who admired her for standing firm, no matter the criticism. Her story underscores the flaws in cancel culture. It's quick to attack, but just as quick to forget the deeper issues once the next scandal arises. Carrie's refusal to conform to public expectations or political pressures made her a rare example of someone who remains true to herself in a world that often demands celebrity conformity. In the end, staying authentic and not letting the noise dictate your life is what ultimately allows you to rise above. Carrie Underwood showed us that real success is about remaining consistent and true to who you are, despite the backlash or outrage. So what do you think? Was the backlash against Carrie justified, or does this serve as yet another example of cancel culture gone too far? Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell too. Catch more breakdowns like this. See you in the next one.